Because correction facilities in Germany actually mean correcting the behavior that got them in there in the first place. One of the greatest phenomenons in the world is the difference between German and US prison systems. Now we know how US prison systems function for the most part.
You're gonna be in like a jail with like a lot of like ghetto people.
You're in jail.
I like you, and I want you. And we can do it the easy way or the hard way.
And it's not necessarily the best.
Oh no!
Okay, in fact, a lot of people will enter the prison system in for petty crimes or crimes that aren't that serious and come out career criminals, because that is the system we've cultivated. Our prison systems in America are pretty much designed to keep people in and reward the people who own the prisons with more money based on the amount of prisoners they have. So there is some incentives to put more people in prison in America, whereas other countries don't really have the same incentive. In German prisons, it's a little different. The prison systems are designed to rehabilitate people, so when they do reintegrate into society eventually, they don't become repeat offenders, which in turn makes society feel a lot safer. I'm pretty sure that's reasonable, is it not? This is exactly what we're gonna be getting into in this video, because I figured, hey, I mean, I do a lot of culture comparison and differences between the US and Germany, so why not cover this? This is huge, absolutely huge, considering all the things that are happening in the world as of late. So before we get started, make sure you guys do me a favor and give this video a thumbs up, like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff, and let's go ahead and dive into the 10 key differences between the German and American prison systems. And the first major point is definitely the focus on rehabilitation versus punishment. That is a very key concept when we address the differences between these two countries. In German prisons, there's an emphasis on rehabilitation and reintegration into society afterward. So there are an abundance of programs that focus on education, therapy, jobs that are very, productive and whatnot, that allow the individual to rebuild themselves and enter society far more responsible than when they came in to the corrections facility. Because correction facilities in Germany actually mean correcting the behavior that got them in there in the first place. Unlike America, where the system is designed more for punishment and deterrence, often with less focus on rehabilitation. But depending on the funding, there are programs that exist to help better some of the inmates' lives. However, that is entirely dependent on how the prison chooses to allocate those funds.
Back in the 1970s, the idea of reforming prisoners, known as the rehabilitative ideal, fell out of favor, and the justice system shifted to being all about punishment. This happened because studies showed rehab programs didn't seem to work, and the people from both sides of the political spectrum had issues with how the sentencing was handled. The left called it unfair and racially biased, while the right thought it was too soft on criminals. Even though the whole rehab is useless narrative took over, some prison staff and court rulings kept certain programs alive. Lately, however, there's been a bit of a comeback for these rehab programs, especially for helping people re-enter society for nonviolent offenders. It seems like people are starting to look at crime and punishment in a more balanced way.
And as we know, the US being a capitalistic society, that kind of dictates where them funds go. So more times than not, those programs are not available to inmates, but there are several prison systems in America where they do have some programs that do help them out. Now, we do need to address the elephant in the room as it pertains to living conditions, because I'm pretty sure you've seen news articles, stories, videos, headlines of what the living conditions are in Germany in their prison systems versus America in our prison system. Listen, from what I've seen, it looks like a hotel stay at the Four Seasons in Germany, whereas in America, it looks like you stay in an Alcatraz, okay? The bottom of the bottom of the bottom. You're lucky if you get even a schmidgem of dirt for lunch, okay?
As far as the living conditions in American prisons go, many facilities fail to offer essential services like medical care, education, or rehabilitation, leaving inmates without the support they need. The 1990s saw a surge in prison populations, during which lawmakers made it more challenging for incarcerated individuals to pursue civil rights lawsuits, effectively reducing court oversight. Today, prisoners often face physical harm and assault, with some facilities neglecting their duty to protect the inmates. For instance, Alabama's prisons have been identified as the most violent in the nation, with widespread issues such as homicides, sexual abuse, and the presence of weapons and drugs.
In German prisons, inmates often have private cells with their own furniture, windows, and access to items like TVs and kettle. The environment is designed to feel more humane and less institutional, which I'm pretty sure the public may or may not have issue with when it comes to certain offenses. Now, I do know that this depends on the type of crime committed, because of course, if you're like a serial killer or something, you're going to be put in a different type of cell, but still, even their cells are far better than even the standard cell that you get in America.
On the flip side, Germany's prison system is decentralized, with each of the 16 Bundesländer managing its own facilities, leading to variations in practices and conditions across the country. Overall, physical conditions in prisons are satisfactory, and there's a strong emphasis on the rehabilitation of inmates. Special attention is given to minors and young adults in custody, as well as to the children of incarcerated mothers. Social workers play a crucial role in decisions related to sentence reduction, prison leave, and disciplinary actions, though prisoners sometimes find it challenging to establish trust with them. The number of individuals under preventative detention has been increasing in recent years. Germany's National Agency for the Prevention of Torture oversees prison conditions, but it has faced some criticism for lacking sufficient financial and human resources.
That's a whole different beast because in America, conditions can vary greatly. But overcrowding is a common thing, as well as shared cells and a severe lack of privacy. And I think it has a lot to do with, again, the money that the prisons make. The people who own prisons, because prisons are privatized in the United States, whereas, they're more of a government-ran thing in Germany. And there's an incentive for the people who own the prisons to keep the money that they get and allocate as little of it as possible to the actual inmates, since they're in there for crimes. There's not too much sympathy towards people who have committed crimes in the US as in Germany. Now, I'm not saying everybody's sympathetic to criminals in Germany, but they do want their environments to be a lot more safe, so it does make a lot of sense.
Okay, so according to the Vera Institute, the US has been throwing people in prison like it's going out of style. A 700% increase over the last 40 years, but it's not really helping. Germany and the Netherlands, on the other hand, are keeping it pretty chill with way fewer folks behind bars. They focus on making prison life as close to the outside world as possible, aiming to help inmates get back on track. Plus, they prefer handing out fines or community service instead of locking people up. Most of their prison sentences are under a year, unlike the US, where the average stint is around 3 years. Maybe it's time for the US to take some notes from these guys and rethink how we do justice.
And in that case, why don't we address the inmate autonomy? Germany versus America. Do inmates in America have any autonomy? I mean, kinda.
They expect you to drink this shit.
Oh my God, bro.
In German prisons, though, inmates have far more freedoms, like the ability to wear their own clothes, like no uniform type stuff. You know what I'm saying? They get to wear their own clothes, shirts, jeans, all that good stuff. They can cook their own meals too, and they can decorate their cells. Now, I guess technically in America, they can decorate their cells to a certain extent.
Okay, I'm so excited. My boyfriend sent me a picture of me and him. So I want to hang it up, but I don't know how I can hang it. You can put a little toothpaste on the back of it. It'll stick to the wall.
But not in the same way they can in Germany, bro. Like in Germany, they can decorate their cells as if they were back home. But in American prisons, like they gotta work with what they got. In American prisons, uniforms are literally always required. And autonomy is very limited. I mean, you do get like some options and whatnot. Like you can work some jobs in US prisons, but you get paid, what, 10 cents an hour or so, maybe less than that. And there are far stricter rules and regulations. So you definitely do feel the pressure of being confined in a system like that. Now, the length of the sentences between German prisons and US prisons is honestly shocking. And we are gonna dive pretty deep into that. Now, with German prisons, sentences tend to be a lot shorter, with life sentences being incredibly rare and often including the possibility of parole after 15 years. American prisons, oh my God. American prisons, they throw around life sentences like it's candy, okay? So don't ever get yourself caught in a courtroom with a judge that's having a bad day, because that is far too often situations like that pop up. Sentences are normally much, much longer, including life without parole and consecutive sentencing that can total to hundreds of years. Literally, there are several cases where people have been sentenced to several lifetimes, like 400 or 500 years. I mean, at this point, I'm convinced that the courts think that we're vampires. We don't even live that long for real. But just in case somebody does, they want you to be clear. You're locked up until your kids are 80. Okay, that's insane work. Now, a big issue that's been hitting the headlines in the United States and the globe, right, when it comes to criticizing US prisons is overcrowding. That is a huge thing.
Too many Americans go to too many prisons for far too long and for no truly good law enforcement reason.
During a revamped war on drugs in the 1980s, mandatory minimum sentences of 5 years and up were introduced depending on the quantity of drugs found on an offender. The policy led to an explosion in the prison population, both at the state and the federal levels, and hardest hit were minority and low-income communities as people were arrested despite the relatively minor infractions they had committed.
Like I said before, there's incentive to recruit as many inmates as possible because the owner of the prison gets more money allocated to that prison if they have more bodies. It's like you get paid per prisoner, and the more prisoners you have, the more money you make. So of course, each prison is thirsting for more and more inmates. So German prisons are generally less crowded due to lower incarceration rates and alternative sentencing options. And as I just mentioned, American prisons have a chronic issue with overcrowding. That is a tale as old as time, and it continues to get worse. So at some point, I feel like we'll get to a point where we won't have enough space to store all those bodies, and that will lead to some very unfortunate solutions as far as where these guys can go when they are locked up. I always wonder if there are too many people in all of the prisons in America, does that mean they don't get stored anywhere, or do they start ramping up the death penalty to make room for people to have a cell in prisons? I have no idea. Let's move on to the next topic. Alternative sentencing. In German prisons, there's an emphasis on non-custodial sentences like fines, community service, or probation for less severe crimes. In American prison systems, while alternatives do exist, incarceration is probably one of the most common things used, even for non-violent offenses. Case in point, look at one of the people who was recently pardoned by Donald Trump, who was serving a long sentence. I'm pretty sure it was more than 60 years, and he was released after serving 10. He was the owner and creator of the website Silk Road. Now, his actions were not violent per se, but he did create a platform that allowed the sharing of wild stuff in the dark web. Transactions that could take place that could not be tracked, which led to him being arrested, but now he's released. So things like that. Obviously there's more to his story, but you catch my drift. Now, let's dive even deeper and get into the use of solitary confinement. Isolation is a crazy thing, and in German prisons, it is absolutely rarely used, as that makes sense. You know what I'm saying? They capitalize on therapy and rehabilitating people to integrate into society, and one of the things that is a giant setback is solitary confinement. So they use that as a last resort with very strict limits on duration. But unfortunately in America, that is not the case at all. It's used far more frequently and sometimes for extended periods, which has been criticized for its psychological impacts, unfortunately. The next thing is something that I didn't even consider, but I guess healthcare access. Now, in German prisons, inmates receive healthcare similar to what they are able to receive in the civilian population, including mental health services. But in American prisons, listen, let's just go ahead and acknowledge the fact that American healthcare is terrible. So if Americans are getting less than the bare minimum, then what do you think happens to prisoners? What do you think happens to prisoners if the average American already gets subpar health insurance? Well, let me explain a little something to you. Healthcare access varies widely, meaning there's damn near none, and it's criticized for being very inadequate. Very inadequate, especially for mental health and chronic conditions. So for as much as people on TikTok and everywhere else keep saying, see a therapist, you need therapy, this, very few health insurance companies cover that. So it's easier said than done. Oh, and we gotta talk about the training when it comes to the corrections officers in German prisons versus American prisons. That's a big thing too. Because I mean, if the prison's not running right, how do you expect anything to function properly? So in German prisons, correctional officers receive extra extensive training, up to 2 years, focused on conflict resolution, psychology, and most importantly, rehabilitation. And as a result, relationships between the staff and the inmates are most times less adversarial. Now, let's talk about American prison systems and the lack thereof of training. Training is far shorter in the American prison system for correction officers. Actually, less than a few months in most cases. And the relationship between the inmates and the staff is far more contentious due to the strict environment and strict enforcement of the rules. And then this leads me into the last element of this video, which is privatization. German prisons are straight up state-run with non-profit institutions funding it. In American prisons, there's an incentive for inmates entering the prison system. So, the prison system in America includes a significant number of for-profit facilities, which has been heavily criticized for incentivizing higher incarceration rates. So I'm pretty sure we can agree that these differences definitely highlight a severe difference in societal and cultural approaches to justice, emphasizing the contrast between a rehabilitative versus a punitive mindset. What do you guys think? Let me know in the comments down below. I think the way Germany's approach has been towards the prison system is a lot more effective, and it creates a far less hostile general environment. However, I do think that with the general populace in America looking at Germany's prison system, people would definitely be distraught to find out that a person that committed said crime, whether it was violent or non-violent, was living it up in them prison cells in Germany. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't think it would settle too well in America. But I do think our prison system does need to be reformed, because far too often do we have people who go into the prison system in America for crimes that are just petty crimes. They're not really harmful or anything, and people don't really get affected too much, but they do break the law, and then they come out as career criminals or even repeat offenders on a grand scale. So I think personally, Germany has it figured out for the most part. Do you guys think that there is anything that Germany can do to make their system even better, or do you think it's perfect the way it is? Let me know in the comments down below.